Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Here's a question for you, and it's an interesting one in the sense that you probably have many, but I think, who's your favorite leader and why? Now, this person can be alive or from history, but who is that person?
My grandfather. God bless his soul. My grandfather, I was born and raised in Bosnia, Sarajevo, former Yugoslavia, and many of your listeners will recognize some of the tragic and troublesome history we had, on top of having wonderful people in great historical sides and beauty. So my grandfather was a very pivotal person in my life and my upbringing. I was 4 or 5 years old, and we would open our mornings with playing a party of chess. Afterwards, we would do a lesson on a particular topic: philosophy, logic, geography, history, politics. I was being asked how to solve some of the issues in the Middle East when I was 5 years old. I felt that was very normal, and I felt every single little girl has this conversation with her grandfather. I had to recognize where New Zealand is on the card and on the map. And I was also I had some numbers on the industries that New Zealand is known for. Yet again, I thought that was very normal. When I turned 7 years old, when I started going to school, talking to my friend, I realized that was quite unique and not normal in the sense of what's normal nowadays. He was always telling me I can be whatever I want to be. And he was always telling me, because keep in mind, I was coming from a patriarchal society. My grandfather kept telling me, you can be whatever you want to be. And as a woman, you always have to be independent and you always have to have your own money. And I didn't realize how revolutionary that was, coming from a man that was born during the Great Depression, coming from his type of upbringing. I was always saying, okay, as a woman, I can be whatever I want to be, check. I have to be financially independent. And he always said, you can do whatever you want to do, as long as you have the qualities for a particular position, as long as you're bringing the best to the table with integrity. And he always said, with compassion.
That is awesome. That is huge from the perspective of everything you just said, right? From his upbringing, from the areas that you were living in, right through to what he shared with you. That is huge. Be independent and earn your own money. That is massive. Yeah. And so I'm loving it. And so having conversations with your family, with your grandfather is really important. I love it when you say, went to school and then realized that wasn't normal.
Because as a young kid, sometimes we're experiencing certain things in life thinking everyone else is experiencing those. And when I didn't realize how unique he was up until I started going to school.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. I love it. I think it's great. It's interesting that you suggested your grandfather, because when we did the 200th episode, I was asked myself, so I was interviewed as you're being interviewed now, and I got someone to interview me, and I was asked who was my favorite leader. And it said, it was actually two. It was my dad. It is my dad, and it was my grandfather. And because Greece is where I originate from, and yeah, it's really amazing. I love what your grandfather said to you. I think it's fantastic. Yeah, neighbors.
We're from the Balkans. We're neighbors.
Exactly. But I love what he said to you. That's brilliant. But also I love the fact that you've taken it and you've done something with it, which is really important. Now, the show here is called Leadership is Changing. When I mentioned that title of the show or that statement, what does that mean to you?
I think and it's not a cliche, during the times of COVID, we realized in order to be sustainable as far as the company or leaders, you have to drastically get yourself out of the comfort zone. Now, we were always talking about these comfort zones in the past, but I think that accelerated quite a bit in the last 2 years. And one of the Forbes publishers, Rich Colgard, who also serves on our Forbes Board of Advisors, he actually recorded the interviews with the top level CEOs within the United States. I actually built a class around those interviews. And these CEOs were saying where they were in January, February prior to COVID versus what happened to their companies and themselves March, April. So if you're that kind of level of success, and you're having to constantly evolve and constantly change, picture what the rest of us have to do, or your listeners that are currently in the mid-level manager positions or aspiring to be managers or leaders and not even in leadership, students that are listening. So don't get settled. Some of you are being educated for the careers that don't exist at this point of time. By the time you graduate, you may go into a career path. I always remember my grandma telling me, I know you are a professor, and I know you're looking at that box. She was talking about laptop, but I'm so confused where your students are. So picture her world prior to modern technology. She's saying my granddaughter is a professor. Her students are somehow in her laptop. I'm not sure how that works. Make the long story short, you have students right now that 10 years from now, they will have careers that don't exist today. So you have to learn the core leadership skills to be adaptable. Some of the skills that were working for us through history, being adaptable, being courageous, being proactive, being hard worker, having your goals, but being able to adjust and change on a moment's notice.
Yep. I think those skills and that are built in cement. In other words, you're developing them and growing them, and that's the foundations. But the goals or the roles that you're doing are in sand, and they will move and adjust, and we need to be able to move with them in the times as well. Great. So we've heard about your grandfather, we've heard about your grandmother, which is pretty cool. And yeah, I love what you say. Get out of your comfort zone. Don't get settled. And I think that what I'm also seeing with a lot of CEOs that I'm talking to is that with the cycle we are in today, are we in the right business? Do we have the actual right organizational structure to support that? And do I have the right leadership team to help lead that, move that forward going? And it's really important to see that because a lot of them don't. And some of them have got their heads in the sand and they're not looking around, and they won't be around for much longer if they don't wake up and get on with it. So COVID has really rattled us and waken people up and taken things to a new level, which has been pretty cool.
Yeah. I don't believe in New Year's resolution. I'm actually get slightly annoyed by those. You have to consistently revamp yourself and create goals for yourself throughout the year. So don't have the calendar trigger your new set of goals, because usually we abandon those.
Yes.
But constantly work on I tell my kids, 1-year plan, 3-year plan, 5-year plan. My daughter's in high school. My 2-year plan is to finish high school. I said, what's offboards? Stuff along those lines. And that's what I do. And you know what? And sometimes some things I'm able to achieve. Sometimes some things we're not able to achieve. There are a lot of external factors at all as well. But as you work towards a particular goal, you may discover something else that you want to work on.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, totally. And I think there's a quote that I always put out there on social media on the 2nd of January. And the quote says, "Dear New Year resolution, it's been nice knowing you. Yours sincerely, 2nd of January." Now, the question I've got for you, this person can be alive or from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
Yeah, I've actually thought long about this. So I've heard you ask this question to other interviewees. And my best example is I don't have one person. I'm a lover of history, and there are some great lessons in history. But I think that there are different people that can teach us different things. And before I was thinking, I got a chance to meet Jack Welch, the former GE CEO, all those books, and he really inspired, but he's not the one person. Through school, I had to learn my art of war, right? But he's not the one person. I think when you look at your career in leadership, it's important to identify who can teach you certain lessons. And I went to a cadet school, right? So everything was a bit formal, brass and polished by the numbers. And some of generals that you study, whether they are ancient or modern history, has adaptation to lessons in leadership. Right? My school was also a Catholic school, so I was always fascinated, believe it or not, by the Bible. And I'm not a strict religious person, but from a leadership perspective, here is a book that has suffered the ages and the torments of man, but has still convinced a mass population into an esoteric deity that we should succumb to, laws, principles, and so forth. So I think virtues of leadership and examples of leadership can be found in everyday life, from early schooling through to something more formal that you do in your life. There's not one person, but I know that Jack got me to look at business differently. I know some of my professors from back in the days in Boston have got me to look at myself differently. But the one thing I take away, and it was really Michael Potter from school some time back now, was if you want to lead, people need to believe in you. When they stop believing in you is when they stop following. And so that being authentic, as in being an authentic leader, probably is the most deepest and most meaningful learning I have had through my entire career.
Nice. Now, if I was to say to you, one of those generals or Jesus or somebody,
Yeah,
you were sitting on a park bench with, having a coffee, what would be one question you want to ask them?
it would be very interesting, especially someone from a more ancient history, to have them look at me, to have them look at the company I've adapted today. And in their eyes, without all this modern technology that we use to enhance life, ask them a question, what am I doing wrong?
Oh, very good. Yeah, that'd be cool. Huh?
Do you know, it's that old paradigm. Sometimes a fresh set of eyes
Yes.
can give a very honest outcome. And the problem we have, especially look at it this way, from what we've spoken about, we're talking about a repetitiveness of selling a message and authentic. It's not uncommon from a behavioral aspect for us to get caught up in our own narrative. And it's sometimes that fresh set of eyes. And in my case, it might be my wife look at me going, what the hell are you saying? What are you? That is that stop, that check that you need to do. And that can be more valuable than anything else.
Yep. I agree. And when I used to travel the world and doing a lot of these events, and even if I do the events today because of the pandemic, we're not being able to travel much, but doing events, when I do these events, some of them could be 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, depending what it is, but I'm on a high. And then I used to travel back to New Zealand from overseas and so forth and come home. But then the family would actually bring me back to reality and do that little bit of a check-in with me just to say, hey, what's going on here? And you're so right. I think sometimes we do get caught up in our own narrative about things. And if you can get different perspectives, it is the best thing you can do, because really, when you're out there doing things, and whether it's in a medical industry or whatever it is, and you're out there selling something or you're trying to sell the vision, if you're stuck in your own narrative, then you're probably missing the mark, or you're not listening to what the market's wanting or what your team might be wanting. And it's a big thing for you to do. So I'm glad you talked about that.
Yeah, let's just phrase that as a reality check. And there's probably more meaning in those two words than we realize.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, the show's called Leadership is Changing. When I say that title or that statement, what does that mean for you?
I think we're right now in probably the best example of what that statement means. From a world perspective, we've gone through near 2 years of COVID. And I don't want to turn this into a COVID conversation, but if you follow news, it's doom, gloom, death, and despair everywhere. Let's just call it what it is. And when we're looking at staff, we've been protective about staff. We've been concerned about their welfare, right? And COVID has brought in a lot of challenges from business, from supply chain, R&D projects getting blown out and so forth. A number of companies decided to hanker down and weather the storm. It doesn't matter whatever. But where we are right now, I think we're all coming to the realization that whatever COVID is, it's here and it's going to stay. And as leaders, we need to evolve. We need to evolve our staff. And as businesses, we need to move ahead with this new macro hanging over us. So here at MedLab, part of our step change is surviving with COVID, knowing that we could wake up tomorrow and there could be restrictions. Maybe we can travel, maybe we can't. But the idea is to park that off and say, that's no longer an excuse. So how do we get that agility back into the company? And how do we forge ahead doing what we are entrusted to do? So when I look at leadership changing, we are actually going through an evolution in MedLab now where we're redoing everyone's KPIs. And the KPIs are about aggressively stepping forward in lighting. And it doesn't matter what the world throws at us. We go back to a mantra that we had pre-COVID, which is everything's okay if our house is in order. So programs are on path, we're developing our staff, and we are all working as one. From our perspective, to survive through COVID, MedLab had to divide into certain silos just to get jobs done. It's now time to kick out the silos. So I'm leading a step change in the organization that's a lot more aggressive. We just had, up until Christmas, global patents get approved for a wonderful delivery platform we have. So I'm on the commercial teams. Doesn't matter. You can travel, you can't travel. Europe's opened, US is opened, it's closed the next day. You need to commercialize, right? And this in part is their belief in me that I'm going to do the right thing by them. I'm not going to expose them to undue risk. There's that health side, physical and mental. But at the same time, it's tuning that company up to accelerate in discussions it's had, how it treats those discussions and moving forward. And it's a big sell process. Yesterday for 4.5 hours, I was on video conference back to Sydney, addressing team members at a 1-to-1 interval The younger guys have a little bit more concern. The older guys have different concern. But it was important at that stage to get down to a you and me conversation on how we move it forward. So the sell position is, at this point, really big. And that sell position doesn't work unless your staff believe in you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I like what you say. Everything is okay if our house is in order. Is that that's the right way of saying it? Yeah.
It is a mantra that we have.
And I think it's the same thing that I think for a lot of our listeners, it's their organizations, their businesses, they should be thinking about that, but also them personally. They should be thinking about them, that everything's going to be okay if their house is in order. In other words, and I call the house probably for the individuals between the areas, right? Their attitude, their mindset and so forth. If everything's fine there, that's good. Health-wise, if they're physically, mentally and emotionally fit, that's good too. Because sure, and I've seen a lot of people over the last sort of 6 months, even year, are really tired. And a lot of it's been the lockdown. But I think a lot of it hasn't been the fact that we've been stuck at home only. It's been that doom and gloom and that fear that's been pushed into a lot of people. And all I can say to listeners is stop watching the news. Yep. It's probably one of the best things I've done, right? And so is not watching the news, but also on my social media feeds, I've stopped all news feeds for months or even over a year. And it's been the best thing I've done. And I think if it's really important to make sure that we've got the right things going in between our ears for us to help us as well.
That's right. We've got to get back to positivity.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get it if you follow Instagram and follow the nightly news.
Yes.
And there's a lot of positive things that companies do, both in staff development, culturally, and in products and services they promote. So we go back to why we're here. And again, there's this reality check that clocks back in.
Ultimately, leaders are going to have to really look at their organization. And I think we'll get to this, so I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but really focus on cultures, really focus on, there's a lot of lip service talking about a people first or a people forward organization. To make that happen really is going to be a challenge because our organizations have been bureaucratic, hierarchical. We still have a lot of work to go with diversity and inclusion and equity, and people are struggling with recruitment and retention and even leadership development. So there's so much on the plate. There's so many different priorities. The pandemic pulled the curtain back and exposed, no matter how good anybody was, it said, you weren't that good. You weren't ready for what was going to happen going forward. So I think the role of leadership is going to really be helping people adapt to all the changes that are happening.
Yeah, wow. I'm loving what you're saying because COVID did expose a lot of people and expose a lot of businesses as well. And I think, so my actual company that I actually own is called Leading Change Partners. And we get in with organizations and partner with them to lead change. In other words, lead change with them amongst themselves as leaders and the employees as an organization, but also lead change in business and in the industry and market. One thing for you to go through change and experience that. Another thing is to go actually lead it as well. And it's a different thing. And I think you're so right what you're saying. COVID has exposed people, and some people have had to go now and change and upskill themselves into other things or pivot, adapt, whatever you want to call it. And they've had to go and do it. And it's been amazing to see the different stories coming through, Ira, and those who have gone off and exploded and gone and done something different in life. And I just think that's just wonderful. Sometimes something like a pandemic or a global financial crisis or anything like that can be the catalyst for us to see change and see things, people moving forward.
Yeah, every day I'm in a conversation with somebody who can't wait. It's either the question to me or their context is that when do you think we're going to get back to normal? And one is we're not. And normal also it's an interesting conversation. And I hadn't thought about it until the pandemic and people started talking about normal. What was normal for you're in New Zealand, I'm in Pennsylvania. We came from different backgrounds. What our experiences in life, that was our normal, but it wasn't universal. I know best what it was like to live in the US. Normal in the United States pre-1960, there was only 1/3 of working age women were working, and sometimes they weren't allowed to work. Women didn't go to college. Women weren't allowed to open a bank account without their husband's permission. We can get into race. If you were a person of color up through the 1960s, you weren't allowed to go to the same restaurants, the same schools, the same hotels, but that was normal. That was normal for our grandparents. That was more. My question, is that the normal you want to go back to? And there are some distorted people that may want to go back to that. But as a whole, that's not what people want, regardless of your race or age or gender or ethnicity. Nobody really wants to go back to that. But that's what we think of normal. But the other part of normal is that I just heard this great definition the other day. And normal is a state of mind where you don't want to see anything change.
Yeah, perfect.
And that's just not going to happen anymore. But not only are things going to change, they're going to accelerate. And you might be familiar, some of your listeners might be familiar with Ray Kurzweil or Singularity University. Kurzweil is the, I think, chief engineer officer at Google, or at least he was. But he talks about the accelerating rate of change, and he has the 10-year rule. And the 10-year rule is similar to Moore's law, which was the computer chip rule, that every 18 months, the rate of processing speed would double. The law of acceleration from Kurzweil was that every 10 years, the pace of change would double, which means that in 2022 that we're in now, if you roll the clock forward into 2042, then everything that occurred in the year of 2020, all the way from in the U.S. an election, a pandemic, wildfires, climate change, and in many other countries, social unrest, many of those were global, that what occurred in 12 months will occur in 3 months. It's terrifying if you think about it, all those events. And then in another 20 years after that, so 40 years from now, all the change that we're experiencing is going to occur like every 11 days. And that's not exact science, but it hopefully gets the point across what living on an exponential curve feels. We're not ready for that. We're not accustomed to that. We want to go back, that there's some predictability, some routine. We want to slow it down. We're not going to be able to slow down the change, no matter what it is at this point, but we can certainly become better at responding and managing the change, managing our response to change. That's, to me, the role of what leadership is going to be going forward. The people that we're going to remember in 20 or 30 years from now, and maybe as an older baby boomer, I won't be around to remember that. But what other people I think are going to be citing as the great leaders of today are going to be the people who helped humanity get through this, and not through handouts, but teaching them how to respond better to an accelerating rate of change.
Yep. Very good. I totally agree. I think that's some wonderful stuff that you're sharing there. Now, Ira, who is your favorite leader? Now, this person could be alive or from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
I'm going to hedge on that one. I've got many, and I think I used to have a pat answer, and then they were all taken out of context. My favorite leaders are many. I've got favorite coaches, sports coaches. I've got one of my favorites who I follow, I still like his philosophy, is Warren Bennis, Bennis. More consultant than a CEO or a coach or an individual. We were just talking before, like your dad, someone who 80 years old, continues to set an example, do his own thing, has a quality of life. My mother, we got relatives, we know people. My favorite leaders isn't necessarily an individual person. It's a person who's led a moral life, an ethical life, has helped community, has humility. It's not necessarily a person that we can recognize by name. It's going back to the Good to Great book. Many people in there, the best people, the best leaders, weren't people we ever heard about. They weren't the people on the front lines. So my favorite leader isn't necessarily an individual person. It's just a person who has not even necessarily come up from the ashes, but someone who has really led other people, helped other people. One of the terms we talk about today is co-elevating people, but had a humility about them, led a good life. And at the end of the day, they were measured not how many dollars they had in their bank account or what their compensation was, but by how many people that they helped and touched.
I think it's about the influence they've had on others and having values and being strong and dependable and consistent. And I love what you say there too, because there are so many people out there. You don't have to be famous. There are people who are out there having influence on others for sure. Ira, the show here is called Leadership is Changing. And when I say that title, that statement, what does that mean for you?
I think it just goes back to what I shared earlier. Leadership, at least going forward, is about change. It's helping people, whether it's more than changing their business model, it's more than building an organization that is going to respond, identify what their future customers are. It's more than just business. Leadership is changing hopefully in a good way, that it is going to be more people focused, whether it's, as I said, there's a lot of terms out there, people forward, people first, but it's going to be people focused, and hopefully leadership, it's going to really finally be more about compassion and empathy and co-working. And you may have the title of leader, but many people put their pants on one leg at a time, and what other terms you want to use. But leadership hopefully is going to be about helping people adapt to a future. and give them help create an environment and provide the skills that will help people have an opportunity to grow and to thrive. Doesn't mean everybody's going to take it, but at least you're an equal opportunity provider in giving people an equal opportunity to grow if they choose, and give them the support and tools that they need.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.